And the latest moves on tariffs and trade by the mercurial mercenary of Mar-a-Lago might be forcing Team Canada to see the light, if you will, and alter its objectives and expectations as to any possible outcome. Over the past few days, President Trump showed the world that he's just too lazy and impatient to do the hard work of negotiating even just one trade deal, let alone 90 or more of them, before his latest and predictable taco trade deadline changed to August 1. First, there was the unilateral sandbagging of his entire trade team, as well as the government of Vietnam. Everyone thought they had an agreement, not yet signed, of course, for an 11% tariff until old Fog of War stepped in and decided it would be 20%. Then, there was the world learning that no first mover advantage with the US exists, as other nations, such as the Philippines, also got slapped with 20%, but without, as did Vietnam, having first conceded anything for the privilege. Then, we caught on that the US being in a trade deficit position with a nation has nothing to do with the tariff shakedown, as news emerged of a planned 50% tariff on Brazil, a nation with which the US has a trade surplus. There, the tariff seems to be more of an attempt to dissuade the nation from legally pursuing its former president for allegedly plotting a coup to stay in power following a democratically administered political defeat, lest the citizens of other nations suddenly be seized with the crazy notion that this might be a good thing. Gee, I wonder why that issue specifically would so bother the current leader of the US. There was also something thrown in there about a potential 100% tariff on Russia, but with a 50-day runway. Plenty of time for one so mercurial to change his mind and shift dates more often than most humans change underwear. However, that also seems to be personal, the result of Trump maybe starting to clue into how impossible it is to negotiate with himself. Dictators gonna dictate, after all. Word on the tweet is that President Call Me Daddy might be getting the sense that Big Baddy Daddy Vladdy has been playing him, toying with him, humiliating him, and laughing at him in public, and that perhaps President Zelensky, who has been showing up for every called meeting and signaling a willingness to give Trump a few wins, like, say, on critical minerals, might be the good guy in this whole mess. And finally, as the tariff he chose to slap on Canada is 35%, but the one on both Mexico and the EU is 30%, there appears to be no rhyme or reason to the actual numbers. In short, it's all one big, hot, sticky, as un-American as Bavarian cream pie mess. During the election, and in the weeks following it, Team Canada's stated goal was to secure a more comprehensive agreement, covering both trade and defense, the push to 5% for NATO, and much bloviating about some kind of Golden Dome oblige. And that agreement would come with no tariffs. That, of course, assumes we're dealing with a rational actor. And obviously we're not. That also assumes that a Trump 47, unburdened from the need to govern as if he needs to be elected to a subsequent term, would behave similar to a Trump 45 who did respect the terms of NAFTA 2 or CUSMA for the remainder of his first term. So far, our Beaver Lodge Magic 8 Ball indicates outlook, not so good. On yesterday's mornings, the Daily Beaver Morning Show, we chatted about the gradually developing image on this global Polaroid trade and tariff picture. And it dawned on us that the reality we might be facing, though Trump will not outright say it because he loves shit disturbing, keeping people in a state of instability and having everyone waste their time, money, and energy kissing his arse, but that the reality we might be facing is that there is no trade deal to be had. So, let's ask the question. What if there is, in reality, no trade deal to be had with Trump, and Team Canada and Prime Minister Carney have already accepted that as the core foundational truth from which they are working moving forward? What then? Well, first and foremost, Team Canada and Prime Minister Carney will need to subtly yet deftly move away from the objective of seeking an ultimate deal that comes with no tariffs. They will further need to start weaning once hopeful Canadians off the expectation that that can be achieved. Yesterday, Prime Minister Carney was scheduled to meet virtually with his cabinet to discuss the way forward given the new threats, and it seems language has already shifted. As reported by the CBC, Prime Minister Carney went into the meeting stating, quote, "There's not a lot of evidence right now," end quote, that a tariff-free deal with the United States is an option, as no country so far has managed to negotiate such an agreement. Now, though opposition parties and opposition media will be quick to brand the admission of the non-existence of a tariff-free option to be a failure of Prime Minister Carney and his government, rather than an inherent character flaw of or reality imposed by the President of the United States. In fact, our national nexus of non-stop narcissistic negativity, Pierre Poilievre, has already gleefully dubbed the shift in language, as if he could have done better with far lesser skills, as, quote, "another unilateral concession from a man who said he would never back down to the U.S. president," end quote. But that's to be expected from a puerile and petty profligate with a particular and peculiar propensity for problems with pivoting. That aforementioned weaning of Canadians off the expectation of a tariff-free agreement may not be as difficult as one might first think. All Canadians have witnessed both our Prime Minister's good faith efforts to nail the Jello POTUS to a wall and said Jello POTUS's jiggliness. It's not hard to imagine Canadians throwing up their hands and quite reasonably concluding, well, that's what dealing with Trump is like. Carney gave it his best shot. Secondly, given that the Mango Mussolini is, as of July 15th, 2025, only 14.38% through his second term, and there's likely a whole lot more messiness coming our way from him, Canadians may have to accept that about the only realistic thing we can do is to manage and massage the miserable, mean-spirited moron into marking time and minimizing his malevolence, while we make haste in moving ourselves away from the maddening malcontent by diversifying our trade and trading partners. Or in other words, strategically and tactically buying ourselves enough time to shift as quickly as possible and shore up our economic defenses before he does his worst. Prime Minister Carney suggested yesterday morning that this may indeed be our next move when he said, quote, "Government has consistently stood up for Canadian workers and businesses throughout these negotiations. We will continue to do so. I expect that the discussions will intensify between now and the end of the month, and we'll be working hard on that." At the same time, we need to recognize that the commercial landscape globally has changed. It's changed in a fundamental manner, and we will continue to focus on what we can most control, which is building a strong Canadian economy. Mélanie Joly, Canada's industry minister, layered onto that impression when she stated coming out of the meeting, quote, "We had a very good and thorough conversation with the Prime Minister and different ministers who are working on Canada-US relations. Of course, I've said it many times, we won't negotiate in public, but the goal is to make sure that, at the end of the day, we are protecting Canadian workers and we are making sure that Canada's interests and Canadians' interests are protected." If humiliating other nations is something Trump believes to be his privilege alone, then there might be something for Team Canada and Prime Minister Carney to learn from President Zelensky's approach of showing up and showing good faith when dealing with Trump, regardless of what he throws our way. And this despite the humiliation Trump attempted to heap upon him on camera during their now infamous awful office meeting. One advantage that Canada still seemingly has is that Trump has not yet resorted to personally insulting or belittling Prime Minister Carney, as he did then Prime Minister Trudeau. And though he has been prone to talk 51st state in public, the frequency of that has diminished markedly since the Prime Minister and he first exchanged pleasantries. If we can at least maintain that, it could go a long way in buying us that much-needed time. And if there is indeed no deal to be had with Trump, given how frequently he likes to throw haymakers, every second we add to our timer could literally mean billions of dollars of difference.